Some major economic updates just announced coming out of America, and these will have giant impacts on Canada's economy and our finances moving forward. Speaking of, we just saw some multi-billion-dollar announcements come out of the Canadian government agency, and it is also going to cost Canadians huge. I think it is a massive misfire, and the opportunity that they had, we need to talk about it. And as these government decisions continue to get worse, and we see the Auditor General call out the procurement system, it is going to continue to make unemployment grow, and Canadians will want to flee Canada. And we are seeing that and going to get into it today. We are also seeing the direct impacts on Canada's economic messaging that they put out when it comes to dealing with America, and Canadians' pocketbooks are getting hurt. But in today's video, we're going to be talking about solutions, some alternative paths we can take to help fix things, because I do think even with everything going on, there are ways to get through this. I'm a little bit sick, so if the energy's off in today's video, that's what it is, but we're still gonna have a good time, so let's get into it. These first couple announcements here are really going to set the tone for what I want to break down, and actually, in principle, they're going to make a ton of sense for what we need to do moving forward. But let's first check this out. This is breaking, just announced, kind of big, so.
We begin, though, with this. After 2 days of meeting, the White House says American and Chinese negotiators have agreed on a framework to get the trade truce back on track. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the deal puts, quote, meat on the bones of an agreement to ease the tariffs on both sides. On Truth Social, President Trump said the deal was done, in saying in part, quote, fold magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me.
Which has always been good with me. But again, this is huge, guys, because there's a multitude of things that this has a direct impact on. One, this could mean if this deal gets inked and all of the tariffs are changed around, a lot of the inflation pressure that Americans otherwise would have maybe been dealing with could be mitigated, making them less stressed and less under pressure, which means dealing with Canada and creating a trade deal, they're going to have more leverage.
We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%.
So that was just the first announcement there. And if they ink a deal and it actually gets put together, that's kind of insane, because we also have breaking news. They are talking about a deal with Mexico getting signed as well when it comes to steel, which is one of our big problems in Canada right now.
The United States agreed with Mexico that they would lift the 25% tariffs in exchange for an agreement that Mexico would stop imports of exceeding a certain level, like a historical level. Well, that's what we're seeing again here. They're getting close to finalizing terms between Mexico and the United States right now to lift that 50% tariff in exchange for Mexico agreeing that they won't import more than a certain level. One of the things we're hearing, though, is that that level that they're not supposed to exceed is actually going to be higher than what the 2019 number was. So that's a real key point here.
Now, I know that at face value, those don't sound exciting or important, but they really are, because Canada is not getting any positive press about our trade deal with the US. It seems like there's no momentum there. So now that we have big news coming from their other large trading partners like China and Mexico, those are at the expense of the Canadian trade deal, and this will mean a lot for jobs and everything we can expect moving forward. And we're already seeing an increase in Canada's unemployment. So let's get into that. We talked about unemployment briefly in other recent videos, but I wanted to get into this article specifically because the language they use is important, and we'll kind of do some translation for you here. But Ontario unemployment hits recession levels driven by excess labor. That's a convenient word. So, Canadian unemployment is rising. The country's largest province is leading the trend. Ontario's unemployment rate climbed to 7.9% in May. Keep in mind, that is Canada's largest populous province, and it's 7.9% in May, nearly a full point above the national average. A new report from BMO warns the province's unemployment rate is now at a level not seen outside of the worst recessions, okay? Not to, sound the alarm, the problem is set to worsen as job creation, already failing to keep pace with labor force growth, slows even further. Because a lot of the stuff that they were saying is, we did see an increase in jobs. There was 8,000, if you remember watching my other video. Well, we saw a positive job posting. It was just the amount of increased labor force. Yeah, I think they mean immigration at the mass level, and they do sort of get into that here. Ontario unemployment rarely reaches this level, and when it does, it's really bad news. BMO warns that the province's 7.9% employment rate hasn't been seen in recent history outside of the pandemic, which we all know doesn't really count because it was a completely manipulated time. And the global financial crisis, it's also considerably higher than the national average. But here's where we get into the important part. Ontario isn't losing jobs, it's attracting excess workers. Again, we got some whitewashing of language there, and I actually think it would be more appropriate to say Ontario isn't just losing jobs, it's attracting excess workers, because that would make this more accurate. As explained last week, Canada's rising unemployment is due to its aggressive population growth, not job losses. It's actually both, because like we've talked about, the jobs that have been created are like service sector, low wage, low skilled jobs. They're not real. It's the alternative economy where we just have immigrants serving immigrants. But since Ontario is the biggest recipient of immigration inflows, it's no surprise that this problem is amplified in the province. So finally, mainstream news is directly recognizing the immigration levels are impacting employment rates at a negative way. Yes, we said the N-word again, negative way. The cause of Ontario's rising unemployment rate since late 2022. So this isn't a new problem. And that's why I've been yelling about this for well over a year on this channel. But, coincidentally, the mainstream news is just covering it now, has been almost entirely on the supply side and could not possibly be absorbed by even a solid job market, says Kavcic. That's gotta be Serbian and Croatian. But yeah, again, we don't have to be super geniuses to understand that we are in a recession in Canada. The only reason that we are not in a technical recession based on the metrics that they arbitrarily made up, it's just a rule of thumb, is because we've been able to pad the GDP with fake stats through population growth. And if that continues, it's going to hurt. This needs to change, especially when we have articles like this. Gen Z is facing the worst youth unemployment rate in decades. Here's how it's different. Youth unemployment is a canary in a coal mine for broader labor market troubles. Yes, and we know that. Interesting photos there, but the graduation cap in hand, Sarah Chung is posing for photos in school regalia ahead of her convocation ceremony. The campus atmosphere is joyful. Happy to be done with school, but what comes next is sobering. Definitely sobering after a few years in university, am I right? This honors student is graduating into one of the worst youth labor markets seen in decades. And it's bleak, said the 23-year-old graduate, the University of Calgary Media Communications program. She hasn't been able to find a job in her field, and she intends to pursue a master's degree. First of all, if you're watching this and you're going, I can't get a job, I think I need to go to more university, don't do it. That's not the problem, okay? Do not think you need to get a master's degree in communications and then you'll get a job in your field, okay? Let's nip that in the bud there, kind of put that trend to bed. And even the communications major said, there's a whole lot of talk about there's a recession coming. I'm not an economist, but I can also see that as well. Yeah, you don't have to be an economist to see. And when they talked to another student here, he said, it's disheartening, said Tivian Varnakumurian. That's got to be Sri Lankan with that length of name there. An electrical engineering student in his final year at York University who estimates that he's applied for 400 to 500 jobs. And the thing is, I'm not surprised, even though he's had with no luck since he started searching in December. If you guys remember, months ago, I had mentioned I had been applying for jobs. I couldn't even get an interview anywhere. We do have a hilarious quote from an economist here. And he says, the economy is now sluggish, even without having breached recession territory. We're in a recession. They're cooking the numbers. I think we're just ahead of things by a few months in these videos, but eventually the economists are going to be able to say, just like they hid that the carbon tax was inflationary for years, they're going to say, yeah, we're not technically in a recession because of the overall GDP numbers, but we are absolutely in a fundamental recession. And that's the problem that they're going to have to be willing to admit, which they're just not doing right now. The bleak hiring landscape has some young people taking jobs just to stay ahead of the bills. Hey, breaking news, CBC. That's why we all take jobs, to stay ahead of the bills. That being said, I spent 2 hours sweeping yesterday, and I have a mechanical engineering degree, said 24-year-old Ben Gooch, the mooch of Dundas, Ontario. I don't mean to roast Ben like that. He could be a good guy. We don't know. The McMaster graduate is working part-time at a garden center to cover some of his living expenses, having applied for upward of 100 jobs since December. When they often talk about the scars of unemployment, there's a lot of things that they mean, and a lot of it has to do with work experience at a young age or being put into the cycle of low wages, which is going to impact them for their overall earnings on the lifetime of their career. And that can have huge compounding impacts. And what's going to happen if we end up with the youth unemployment continuing to grow because the economy is slowing and then we keep skyrocketing immigration? We're going to see the continued trends that we're seeing, like we're going to get into, of Canadians fleeing Canada. So let's check that out. Have you liked the video yet? Helps get these videos in front of more people and helps the channel grow as well. Sign up for Wealthsimple. Link is down below. You get $25. I get $25. Support the channel. Let's get back to it. Hold on to your toques, Canada. People are leaving in droves. In 2024, a staggering 81,601 Canadians, important fact there, packed their bags and bid farewell to the Great White North, marking the highest emigration tally since 2017. Every province reports a year-over-year increase in departures, marking a staggering increase when compared to previous years. We are seeing these trends accelerate in 2025. But what's driving this mass exodus, and what does it mean for the rental market in 2025? Let's unpack the chaos. Canada's housing landscape is undergoing a seismic shift, and the newly released 2025 rental market trend report by Live.Rent delves into this nationwide crisis, from record-breaking emigration numbers to plummeting housing starts and wildly fluctuating rent prices. The report paints a dramatic picture of a country at a crossroads. We have a country where we are telling our young people, you can't work, you can't afford to live, the best option is for you to leave. But don't worry, while you're leaving, we are going to keep skyrocketing immigration because that's what's good for the economy. You guys should have heard about my experience at Wendy's last night. I don't know if these are the super geniuses that we're necessarily bringing in. We're going to be saving the economy. And I think I got food poisoning. Maybe that's why I'm sick. But it's important to pay attention to charts and trends like this when we have people leaving, because as Canadians are leaving, we have this. A person came from the UK to Canada, crossed over to USA, applied for asylum, which was granted, crossed back into Canada and applied for asylum. Why did they do that after already having it in the US? We offer more welfare and more benefits here in Canada. When we give the incentives for these people to want to come here for free stuff, they are going to do everything they can to continue to come here for free stuff. And once they're here, they're not going to want to leave because, you know, I talked about this in another video a few weeks ago, but I'm seeing this go around again, that the new top refugee claim by country 2025, #1 is India. What a surprise. Hey buddy, how doing? Here to be refugee, no problem. And they're saying it's not even close, and it's not. And when you see charts about Canada, this is Canada's net international migration since 1952 to 2025. Don't let them rewrite history with the whole Canada, a nation of immigrants. Yeah, it is if Canada's history started 5 years ago. But if we look at these charts, you can see how low the levels were, you know, since 1952. But somehow in the last 5 years, when this skyrockets as young people are not employed and are leaving, and we know that the government's going to continue to make the wrong decisions. And as they do, as these numbers skyrocket and people leave, we're going to continue to see stories like this. Yes, anecdotal. Today, I was waiting in the emergency room for 7 hours with my wife, who had a serious concussion, a 3-centimeter laceration on her head, and a broken ankle and a fractured rib. 7 hours. Does it sound like quality healthcare? 90% of the people in the ER were Indian. So don't even try and tell me immigration is not a problem. Guys, just next time you go anywhere, use your eyes or the thing in your head. And obviously, you know, the regular viewers of the channel, we're all on the same page. But anybody who's visiting the channel, take a moment and realize that these are real things, that there's no problem with us recognizing that these truths exist. First of all, this is anecdotal. I don't know anything about this guy or who he is. I'm sure you've heard stories anecdotally in your own life or have experienced this of going to the emergency room, seeing the people around you, not getting served for hours, then they rush you out as fast as possible because how bad the demand is, which means the quality of care you've got while you're there is even lower. And I know someone personally who spent hours in emergency only to be rushed out with a misdiagnosis that ended up resulting in major surgeries that otherwise they wouldn't have had to have dealt with because of these rushed, stressed healthcare systems. And this is going to continue. But, finally, and guys, don't be mad because even Pierre's hugest proponents are weighing in that he's making bad decisions here. But here's his announcement on immigration. And you guys know, if you've been watching me, some of you guys have been around for over a year. You've been watching the channel. I've always criticized him on his stance on this, but let's see his updated statement.
For a stronger border, we want severe limits on population growth to reverse the damage the Liberals did to our system. The population has been growing out of control. Our borders have been left wide open. This has caused the free flow.
His mouth and audio might be off a little bit. Not sure why.
Of drugs, human trafficking, illegal migration, and much worse. And that is why we want a stronger border. We want to crack down on abuses in the immigration system. And we want to ensure that any frauds in the refugee system are reversed. Those are the things we're looking at, but we're also going to study the bill carefully to make sure that long-standing Canadians who are following the law are not having their rights and freedoms violated.
Now, before you guys try to run cover for him, you guys know we've put out videos. I also wanted him to win the election at the time. He was the one who everybody was saying it'd be good if he won. But my biggest criticism is, hey, I don't think he's serious enough about immigration. And I know you're going to, you can't say about immigration because he's running politics. Even his biggest proponents, we have Mr. Sunshine Baby coming out saying Pierre Poilievre's advisors need to be fired. Why is Pierre doing a press conference from the hallway of the same time that question period starts? PM Mark Carney is actually there today, so the House is quite busy and entertaining. Pierre has become a content creator at this point. Nobody worked harder than Mr. Sunshine Baby during the election to get the clips out there, to provide coverage, all these things. And even if I don't always agree with Mr. Sunshine Baby, I know he is one of the hugest Pierre voices in Canada. Speaking of criticizing the government, their decisions, and some changes we can actively make, we have a couple pieces of information here. So this tweet came out from Shane Wessel, and he said, someone who's built a business and dealt with all levels of government, I can tell you Canada's public service is broken, and here's what's wrong, and here's how we can fix it. And of course, he has the clip of the Auditor General there who was talking about how every single procurement contract basically had levels of corruption or mismanagement, and it cost the Canadian taxpayers billions, probably hundreds of billions over the time that this Liberal government's been in power for the last decade. And not that everybody was perfect before then, but it's just, this is how broken our system's gotten. And he's going to bring up a few good points here, but we're going to see how this directly relates to the multi-billion-dollar announcement we're going to talk about. Canada's public service is broken. Political interference, bloated management, and entrenched union culture have eroded institution once trusted to serve Canadians. For some reason, it feels like we're serving them now. It's time we face this reality head on. And he gets into some stuff like, we've got a bunch of staffers, unelected officials, they're clogging up the system. And he's not an anti-union guy. He's just saying right now the unions are rewarding lack of performance, and then they cover for people. And, guys, I worked at No Frills for 4 years, also a unionized thing. The worst employees were the ones who got locked into the union and said, you can't fire me. I'm going to go to the rep and I'm going to make all the complaints. And here's he said how we can fix it. We need to restore accountability for elected officials. I totally agree. I hate that there's no recourse for these people. They're allowed to do whatever they want, whenever they want. They get, worst they get is a talking to. And we also need to reform union contracts to reward performance. Yes, we cannot have these union contracts be based around, well, we don't want to do anything because we don't like it. Streamline management, hire and promote based on merit, because how are these people constantly failing forward? At this point, it is starting to feel like some weaponized incompetence from our government, and our public service must serve Canadians, not insiders. This isn't new. We know Canada's got a problem, and we're seeing it with clips like this. So you guys know I like Kirk Lyubimov. Canada wants to expedite projects that are national interest into a 2-year review decision process. But before then, projects need to become in national interest. How? The Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Tim Hodgson, who everybody's saying, oh, he worked for Goldman Sachs, he knows everything. We talked about this clip in another video, but it's so important for what we're going to get into now.
As a standard, there'll be some situations where that might not be what Indigenous people want, but that's sort of a standard, and that it will need to honor our obligations to climate change.
So private companies are going to see that and go, oh, great, so more red tape. This is supposed to be at speeds that we've never seen before. We're pushing these projects. And he's talking about what, the Indigenous Canadians and the natives want. And I think we all know. What they want. And that's a fresh, brand new 2025 Ford F-150 right there, trailer on the back, horse coming out the back. We can get these guys, starting $52,800. That's a pretty good entry level. And that's, that is for the XL model. So I don't know the kind of features it's going to have. I do think if things go well enough, guys, we could get you some Lariats. That is a little bit more expensive. It's $82,000, but we could get there if you start approving some of these projects, especially allow us to build the Sovereign Wealth Fund from the Northern Gateway Pipeline. You don't get a King Ranch. It's too much. Don't ask. I draw the line at the King Ranch. It's too much. You guys are getting too greedy. But here's why this is important, again, for everything we just covered. Think about the steel announcement coming out of Mexico. Think about the trade deals with the U.S. and China and all that stuff. But here's what Canada decided to do while we're trying to get a deal ourselves with the U.S.
BC Ferries has chosen a Chinese company to build 4 new major vessels to replace an aging fleet. The publicly owned company says China Merchants Industry Weihai Shipyards has won the contract. BC Ferries isn't saying how much the shipyard will be paid to protect future bids. The team says 20 shipyards around the world pre-qualified for the procurement process. There were also site reviews, reference checks, and contracts with third-party assessors before deciding on Weihai.
So funny that they even said, we even used extra consultants. Guys, we are in trying to get a trade deal going with the United States. I looked into it, and they have almost 20 shipyards themselves that could qualify to build ships like this. Do you think it would have been prudent for us to have tried to find a way to work with the American companies, considering China has tariffs, a huge 100% tariffs on some of our largest agricultural products that we export, and we're going to reward them with multi-billion-dollar shipbuilding contracts? It's estimated that these 4 ships alone could be worth up to $1 billion in contracts, and this is not all of the ferries that is going to be needed eventually. So why didn't we take this, bring it to the table? We will bring these billion-dollar contracts down to these U.S. trade companies while they're signing deals with other countries. So China's signing deals on the back end. You think China cares what happens to us? No, because we're just going to keep working with them and rewarding China, who's punishing us with tariffs right now, with new contracts. And heaven forbid we try to find a Canadian company. They did say no Canadian companies submitted to this. That needs to be investigated. How do we have no Canadian shipbuilding companies in all of Canada who submitted for multi-billion-dollar contracts? Heck, set money on fire by giving it to Bombardier, for frig's sakes. And I can't stand Bombardier, but at least we'd be setting the money on fire in Canada versus setting it on fire over to China, which we don't need to keep supplying them with money. But we do have clips from Canadian politicians like this, which shows us Canada has no intention of trying to get a real deal done with the United States. Look at his words in this clip.
And this morning I offer my deep concern, solidarity, and prayers with the people of California. Streets unarmed, defending the rule of law against illegal kidnapping and deportation, and they're being faced down by the military might of the United States Marines. We're not talking about creeping fascism here. This is full-on police state tyranny from the gangster president Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm sure this guy's really concerned about that when obviously we had the convoy and all the things in Canada. But we're going to talk about the foreign problems and specifically call out Donald Trump, the guy we're trying to get a deal with.
And this is the man who will soon be crossing our border to attend the G7 meetings in Canada. I have received hundreds of messages of concern and outrage from Canadians that a convicted felon, sexual predator, and a man who has threatened our nation's sovereignty
You can't just make those statements. That's insane.
Is being allowed into our country. I understand the Prime Minister Carney's reluctance to.
And if you guys are curious, yes, he was an NDP member. And here's the messaging that the NDP and the Liberals and all of these people have put out for all this time. Guess what's happened? We've now got to run counter campaigns to tell Americans, yes, we still like you. Please come to Canada, because these Canadian businesses are suffering, and it's all because of bonehead politicians. Guess what? The BC procurement that's not using Canadian steel, Canadian labor, or Canadian anything, NDP as well. We get videos like this where we have to run counter propaganda to the propaganda. It's getting funny, like, seeing this.
Last December, American Dan Davis and friends planned a motorcycle trip to Ontario this summer.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada.
But then, in January, U.S. President Donald Trump took office, began a trade war, and threatened to annex Canada. Canadians got angry, even booed the U.S. national anthem at hockey games.
Can you see by the dawn's
So
if you're watching this and you were at that game and you booed the national anthem, you're a nerd.
Davis had reservations about the trip.
What were you worried Canadians might do?
All it takes is one person to say, you know what, I'm going to show these guys a lesson, whether it's, vandalizing a bike or throwing a beer can at you or whatever.
The number.
That might sound crazy that he's like, oh man, I was worried they'd vandalize my bike. We actually have documented cases of people smashing out windows of American vehicles in Canada in 2025.
Number of trips Americans made to Canada has dropped, almost 11% in April and more than 8% in May for car travel compared to the same time last year.
I'm American.
To encourage Americans to visit, some Canadian tourism groups have launched friendly ad campaigns in the U.S., including this one by Quebec's Eastern Townships.
What kind of concerns were you hearing from Americans about coming?
They are asking if they will be welcome if they come in Quebec. So this is why we wanted to send in a message to confirm that they are surely welcome, not to be scared to visit us.
You're always welcome.
In BC, more than a dozen businesses that specialize in bear viewing tours are sending Americans the same message.
So it turns out if the Prime Minister and winning political party of Canada runs an entire campaign on taking on the US and essentially hating America, driving up so much division between the two countries that you scare Americans to where they don't feel safe coming to Canada, it will hurt Canadian tourism, even though they can come to Canada with a giant exchange rate bonus. If anything, Americans should be coming here in droves. Turns out it backfired on you, dweebs, huh? The elbows up was such a damaging campaign. I cannot believe it, especially when we have politicians still attacking the US while we're trying to get a trade deal done. This is why Canada will never get ahead, because we have those boneheads who should never be in power. The only way things will change if we stop allowing those types of bureaucrats and absolute losers remain in power. We can't keep letting those people get elected. We need way more grassroots movements and people involved in politics. Obviously, support your community as much as you can. Encourage people around you to have kids, because Canadians need to have way more kids. And I do think we clearly need to start negotiating way more trade deals using the leverage of these orders from the government, especially when we're talking billions of dollars with the US, so we can bring us back together, repair all the damage done by the Liberals. But if you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Sign up for Wealthsimple. The link is down below. You get $25. I get $25. It's a way for you to support the channel, take on the big banks, and get some good banking products. Not sponsored, but thank you and have a great rest of your day.